This is the best of First and Last, the podcast, with Mike Golic Jr. and Robin Lundberg.
Before we get to the NBA playoffs, let's give a quick shout out to Hockey Guy out there. We know Hockey Guy is always out there saying, talk about hockey. I do see that Jake Allen is the number one trending topic on Twitter at the moment. 51 saves for the St. Louis Blues last night. That is a lot of saves as they beat the Wild amongst the other games in the NHL. But just to do our due diligence, Hockey Guy, there you go.
Yeah, no, we had someone tweeted us yesterday, said, you guys ever going to consistently talk about hockey on the show? And the answer is probably no. Probably not consistently ever, but do love a good bout of playoff hockey. I remember last year as we were just getting started, I made my effort to push it into the headlines, and Jake Allen makes that very easy for us here last night. We were looking up before the show because I just instinctively said, like everyone does, oh yeah, Jake Allen stood on his head last night. It was incredible. They were on the road. Minnesota was rocking, and it wasn't enough because of that otherworldly performance. And we tried to figure out where the phrase "stand on your head" came from. I forget if we got a definitive answer of this or not, but
some old-time hockey guy, like the equivalent of James Naismith or something, changed the rules so that a goalie was actually allowed to go down on the ice and said he could stand on his head if he wants to. That's the mythology that we're following.
Ah, there you go. See, a long tradition of standing on your head in the NFL. NHL? I think it was like in 1918 or something like that. So take that little bit of information to your water cooler today as you and the rest of hockey guys are sitting around talking about what a great first night of the NHL playoffs it was.
Take what information? You guys didn't even say where it came from.
What's the information? Go ahead, producer guy, Dan.
He just said where it came from.
I alluded. I didn't say
it was former NHL president Frank Calder, for which the Calder Trophy is known.
Okay, and what year was this?
Golic was right. It was 1918.
All right, so it was a long time ago. That's what I was saying. You know, it was Peach Basket time. I don't know what the hockey goals were made of.
Look, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't at least make sure we got the info correct.
Producer guy Dan in there trying to endear himself to hockey Twitter now so that they'll come to his defense later on in the show. I see the calculated move here.
You know what? The common refrain, right, is a hot goalie is what you need. It is interesting, though. It is unique to all of sports, I would say, because I can't think of anything else that's even equivalent where the scoring area is so encompassed by an individual on the playing field, because the goalie takes up so much of the actual goal. You don't see that anywhere else.
No, and it's I guess for me it's always interesting, too, because for the part of the game the goalie makes up, because when we think of the stars of the NHL, we usually don't name the goalies in that realm. It's usually the Ovechkins, the Crosbys, all of the rest of...
Other than maybe Henrik Lundqvist.
Yeah, exactly. King, of course, all hail the king. But besides that, we don't really think of them like that. And yet in the hockey universe, I always love seeing the goalies the way they exist on the ice, because they get protected like the quarterback, like the central piece of football, to where if you get anywhere near the cage, if you get anywhere near that prized possession, that's immediately when all the pushing and shoving starts.
We'll make that Straight Talk brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. Best phones, best networks, half the cost. Hockey goalies are important. Straight Talk Wireless, nationwide coverage on America's largest and most dependable networks. Now, the NBA playoffs also set after a mockery of an end of a regular season last night. The Celtics, you heard, clinching the number one seed, beating the Bucks, who didn't play anybody last night. All these seeds are set. The Bulls beat the Nets last night as they were resting all their players. And you get some interesting matchups, I actually think, for the first round, because the first round sometimes can feel a little bit like a march towards the inevitable. And I would argue that the first round should go back to 5 games, personally. But nevertheless, the Grizzlies and Spurs meet in the first round for what feels like the 10,000th time. I feel like the Spurs always play the Grizzlies in the first round of the playoffs. But to me, the two standout series, both are in the Western Conference, and that's Jazz Clippers, because I don't know who I would pick in that series. I really have to think long and hard about that. And then, of course, maybe the marquee matchup from a selling standpoint being the Thunder and the Rockets with Russell Westbrook against James Harden.
Dueling MVPs, the running joke you've had of put the MVP trophy on top of a ladder on top of this, and let's play it all for right then and there. But you're right, going to be an interesting look in that series. You've got on the other side, you've got the Celtics, who took the 1 seed now for the first time since 2008 when they won it all that year, and then LeBron James and the Cavaliers occupy that 2 seed that, looking back on it, I've seen the stats a few times now where of the 5 times LeBron James has been a 2 seed in the Eastern Conference, he's been to the NBA Finals all 5 times. So this still can work out very well for the Cavaliers if history serves itself.
I don't think he loves seeing Paul George across from him due to their battles, but that's not a bad matchup. The Pacers aren't great, obviously, and that's not much travel there. I mean, you have to think about that aspect of it. There's not much travel for Cleveland to go to Indiana. To me, if the Cavs are vulnerable, and I've said this before, but if they're going to go out in the East, I think it'll be in the second round to Toronto. That's where I think the team that has the best chance to knock them off in the course of the playoffs, regardless of the seeding and all that stuff. So if I'm going to predict their fall, which I won't, but if it was going to happen, if it does happen, I bet you it's in that second round to Toronto.
Yeah, we've both been on record of saying I'm not going to be the one that predicts it happening before I finally see it happen. The fall is going to happen before any of that for me, because you still give them, at least up until that Eastern Conference final, I still give them that benefit of the doubt that because of LeBron James, because of the 0 dark 30 and turning it on for the playoffs in the way that he uniquely has shown the ability to do, they're going to get that from me every bit of the way.
I like Toronto for their versatility. They have a lot of different looks they can give you, especially adding Ibaka and Tucker, and then, of course, now that Kyle Lowry's back. But they don't have a cakewalk in that first round either. Milwaukee is a bear to play against. I would say a buck to play against, but that doesn't make sense as a phrase. They are really difficult to play against because of their length. That they get in the passing lanes. They're just, length is one of the hardest things to deal with in sports, especially in basketball, because the stuff you normally can do is taken away. And, I think they'll win that series, but that's not a team I would want to see in the first round. So some interesting first round matchups there in the NBA. Was it worth it? Was that long regular season, was the mockery of the end of the regular season worth it to get to these NBA playoffs? 888-729-3776, 888-SAY-ESPN. As I look at my screen to figure out where we're going in the rest of the show, to take producer guy Dan guidance, I see Dave Chappelle as Prince levitating from a basket. R.I.P. to Charlie Murphy, the storyteller behind 2 of the most legendary sketches in the history of television, the Prince sketch and the Rick James sketch on the Chappelle Show.
Yeah, incredibly unfortunate news yesterday, coming down and seeing that one. Only 57 years old, a battle with leukemia that I, to be honest, didn't know he was even fighting.
I don't think anybody did. I think he was kept it secret.
That's it. That seemed like very quiet news, but definitely shockwaves. I think for everyone, especially around our age, for a lot of the unfortunate celebrity losses, Prince being one of them, in the last calendar year, it's been tough. It's certainly been tough for a lot of people, but that's felt a generation away. And all of a sudden, this one struck right in the heart of basically everyone from the age of 35 down who had grown up when Chappelle's Show was so popular, was such a big part of the culture. And you're right, for all the success and praise that Dave Chappelle got, Charlie Murphy, every bit of the way, was such a driving force in that show in a lot of sketches, but those 2 in particular really, I think, cemented a great legacy for him, a guy who most people will tell you is a really funny comedian in his own right. His proximity to his brother Eddie, who's an all-time great, always created an interesting dynamic, but in all honesty, a really sad day, a really tough one, and a reason I spent most of yesterday going back and watching all of those old Chappelle skits.
His delivery was just so great in those. Charlie Murphy!
First and last, the podcast.
That marathon of an NBA season, which, by the way, I feel like partially we're doing it a disservice. I get the complaints at the end, and I'm with you. I'm with everybody there. I wasn't watching or paying attention. Those games were meaningless, and there is a problem in that regard. There are things that need to be fixed. But there were so many great individual performances over the course of the NBA season. Perhaps they don't need to be lost in this. We saw record-setting performance from Russell Westbrook, of course, from LeBron. Kawhi Leonard had an awesome season. I saw that James Harden was 1 point away last night from combining for the most points and assists ever in a season. He's 1 point away from, I believe it's Tiny Archibald. So there were so many marvelous all-time sort of performances throughout the course of the season and some great games, that probably shouldn't be lost lamenting the last 2 weeks of it.
Yeah, I mean, you had Giannis Antetokounmpo, who in addition to being the name that everyone tried to have some fun pronouncing, just became the 5th player in league history to lead his team in points, assists, rebounds, blocks, and steals in a single season. I think the first since LeBron in 2008 and 2009 to pull that one off. 13 different players averaged 25 points a game this season. And along the way, you had enough of those moments to get up for, to look forward to. We went into the season with Durant and the Golden State Warriors being the headline. How would that machinery all gel together? Then you had the injury that put some things into question. You had the Cavs struggles on multiple occasions, the LeBron's usual January temper tantrum. We had enough to keep us entertained, even if it wasn't on an individual night-in, night-out basis.
Now, the games need to live up to it in the postseason, because even if you want to lament these other things, the rest and the tanking and all that stuff, it was still a storyline. It was still content for us to discuss. Now, I think if you look at the ratings, especially at the end of the season, it's justified. All of the moaning and complaining is justified because people were tuning away because there was no reason to tune in. ESPN Radio, presented by Progressive Insurance. You can save hundreds on your car, business, or recreational vehicle insurance from a local independent agent. Go to progressive.com today. Now that's Progressive. Looking at the sound that we have, the one that interests me the most is Rachel Nichols, because plenty of other people, we've got Jeff Van Gundy, Michael Wilbon, maybe we'll get to it, but we kind of can guess where their opinion is, and they give their opinion very strongly a lot. Rachel Nichols, a different sort of take, generally, but she had this to say.
I have no horse in the race on whether it's the Pacers or the Bulls or the Heat who make the playoffs. But as a fan of the game, I do want whichever teams to make it to have had to earn it. The NBA should be embarrassed if 2 of its biggest institutional problems right now, the misuse of player rest and that many teams are more incentivized to tank than try to win, are what come together tonight to punish a Miami team that instead tried to do something that feels increasingly quaint these days. Actually fight to make the playoffs.
And Miami, 41-41, that's actually really impressive. They just missed out on the playoffs as a result. But for them to do what they did now without LeBron, without Dwayne Wade, and without Chris Bosh, to finish 500, Eric Spoelstra probably should be in the running for Coach of the Year.
He absolutely should be, and you could hear it. The sound, I was listening on SportsCenter all night coming in, the sound from Eric Spoelstra after that game sound like the way we're used to hearing like a high school or college coach talk about the team and the players, talking about he wished he could give them something more than what they've gotten now, which is a ticket home, talked about the realization that they won't have practice tomorrow, and you heard such genuine hurt in his voice because you could tell they had all really galvanized around what had been an unbelievable turnaround in their season, and Eric Spoelstra's continued rise as a coach learned how to be a champion with that group of guys. I think like LeBron left Cleveland to come down to Miami to quote-unquote learn how to be a champion with Dwayne Wade and that bunch of guys. Eric Spoelstra got that rep for so long as a puppet, and instead what that guy did was used all of that experience to become a pretty darn good basketball coach.
Yeah, he's bummed. Who's not bummed? I don't think Boston wanted to see Miami in the first round. I think they're happier to see Chicago.
Absolutely, especially getting a healthy Dion Waiters back, too, that had been so integral down the stretch as a guy that it was sort of jokingly, I filled in on Lebitard's show, and they've got that Miami local hour where there's a lot of Heat basketball talk, and sort of jokingly talked about the idea that Dion Waiters could potentially command a max contract after the season. But as the season progressed after that, it started to look more and more like, okay, this is a guy that was really helping their team out in a big way down there.
Yeah, and that speaks towards their culture, right? You hear that word a lot. The Nets were the team that benched everybody for Chicago. I think they've done a good job this year, even as they've been bad changing their culture. But Miami is a proven culture. And you take somebody like Dion Waiters, who has looked like a total, malcontent and gunner in other places and looked like he could resurrect his career there.
And in today's day and age where so much of what we've talked about is dues paying and people getting opportunities that others view them as having not earned, Eric Spoelstra is sort of the poster for the complete other side of this, a guy who started basically cutting tape and doing all of the dirty work in that Heat organization and working himself all the way to a point where we are having serious conversations about him manipulating a roster lacking in talent all of a sudden to a point where we'd consider him maybe a Coach of the Year guy.
Producer guy Dan has put this on my screen. Pacers Bulls playoff wins over under 9.5. Where would you go there?
Pacers Bulls playoffs win.
That's way too high.
Yeah, I would hammer the over.
Yeah, I'd take the under in a second. The over-under should be like 4.5, not 9.5. Because I'd say I'd take the Cavs in 5. Oh, he meant total games. All right, he's saying total games.
First and last.
Dylan Brooks declared for the NBA draft, even though he's just a projected second-round pick. By the way, One and Done, the 30 for 30 premieres tonight on ESPN at 9 p.m. Eastern. And perhaps some of these guys are starting to see going overseas as a route, an in-between route. I mean, Brandon Jennings famously did it before rather than school and all that, but it hasn't become too much of a trend. But when you see guys who aren't guaranteed first-round picks declaring for the draft, because a second-round pick doesn't really guarantee you anything, you have to think that comes into the back of their mind. And it's not the least appealing option in the world if you think about it, if you really think about it. Now, for some people, it might be daunting. But for some people, going to college is daunting, leaving home, right, going to college. Because a lot of people at that age want to travel the world anyway, right? So if you could go play in some place like, say, Spain and get paid to go play in Spain, that sounds like, pretty good deal to me.
Yeah, that all sounds good in theory. Now, it gets tougher in practice because I have plenty of friends, guys that were at Notre Dame during my time who've gone over and played in a lot of really obscure leagues in Europe too, and there is a factor where you are isolated. There's a language barrier you've got to deal with. So you mentioned going to college, take that and then some when all of a sudden you're dropped fish out of water somewhere. But you're right, as the money continues to become a better and better option over there, that's just the word that starts to, I'd say, go off on the radar a little bit if you're the NCAA as options, because that's the only threat to the monopoly that you've got going.
And really, all this goes back to the same conversation. I mean, I think we were talking about this yesterday for some reason, because I remember quoting the 39 of the top 50 public employees or NCAA coaches of some sort. But really, that's where this goes back to. Leaving for greener pastures, in a sense, green being the money, and college players not getting paid. And, a lot of these guys are on real programs. And Oregon was just in the Final Four, right? I mean, so these guys are in this big business that is college basketball, and you would not see this if there was more incentive to stay in college for whatever the reason may be. Either the rule being if you declare for college that you have to stay however many years, or if the college players were being compensated in some way.
And that was something. So we correct me if I'm wrong, because my memory's hazy right now. We had a new NBA CBA agreed to earlier this year in December, and so that 2 and done rule wasn't added to it. So that was something that I know after the last time around was a bit of a talking point and was treated like something that could come up and didn't. So that was, to me, the more realistic chance than pay for play, because in my mind, pay for play has always been a pipe dream. It's fun to talk about and it's cool to theorize about, and it's one of those things that should happen if we're going by what's right and what's doing right by these players. But it's not going to happen because it involves the group in power giving up some of that power willingly. But that being said, this can alter this. So I thought you had a better chance of guys staying in college longer because they were mandated to by the other side, by an NBA side that from the players didn't care about the fate of a handful of college kids, but that didn't happen. So I don't see much in the way of change unless this financially does become such an option for some of these guys.
Well, if you were to add that and make guys stay in college longer, I think that would help both the NCAA and the NBA. I mean, it would make for more developed stars coming into the NBA, guys that you get a glimpse of who become stars, but another year in college, another run through the tournament, they become bigger stars. They become a little bit more ready-made, though I don't know if college basketball actually prepares you for the NBA as much as it should in a common sense way, because it's so different. On the other side, of course, the NCAA product would get better because you'd have guys around longer. At the same time, that's not fair. I don't see why you should have to. I mean, fundamentally, while I may concede that it could help both the NBA and the NCAA, I don't think it's the right thing to do, because if you're able to go play professionally, why should you be blocked from going to play professionally?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. So in a vacuum, you're limiting the earning potential and the earning window for guys that have the ability to go out and do that. Now, we also understand, and the reason that it's something that people say, well, why don't the players fight for this, or why don't the NBA players care about this? Well, they're worried about the guys that are currently in the league, and they're not going to lose sleep, much like we talk about in college. Leonard Fournette was always a case for that. Jadeveon Clowney was a case for that, of guys people said, well, they should have been able to leave after their first year. They were clearly physically ready, but no one's going to give up anything at the bargaining table for a handful of guys that are going to be far and away the exception and not the rule.
Yeah, and I've said this before, but I think that they should make the rules uniform in college and the NBA, and really FIBA too. I would adopt the goaltending rules from FIBA because they allow for more consistent play. But I would move the 3-point line back in college, take the shot clock even down to the 24 seconds. I just don't understand why they're not playing within the same rules in basketball. There should be rules and dimensions that are set for basketball. To me, once you get to the college level, it's not like you're physically inferior to the point where you can't shoot an NBA three-pointer.
Yeah, and that's the part you talk about, preparing people, because both of these avenues, whether it's overseas or in college, are supposed to be about preparing you, in theory, for that next step, for that jump to the NBA, even though we know all the statistics about the number of guys that actually succeed and go on to that level in any sport. But it's supposed to be about preparing you for that in a number of ways, and we know that, especially in the NCAA, they fall short of that preparation model in a lot of ways. They're concerned with the billions of dollars that college basketball brings them in, and understandably so, but that comes often at the expense. And so that's what we're talking about here is, can that overseas product ever become better at preparing guys for the actualities of the NBA game, provide them with enough money to make it worth their while, and also up their exposure in some way, because that's the one wild card in this, is that you can go overseas and you can make a good bit of coin, but for a lot of these guys, and especially the one and done, or the guys that don't see themselves being around college often, it is a good way going through the tournament, going through the college basketball season, to raise your profile. We saw it in a freakish way because of his dad, but Lonzo Ball through this year, it became a household name going through this basketball season because of going through the tournament, being in this country, going through all this. And that's not to say that scouts and the right people won't be able to find you if you're good enough wherever you are, especially in overseas where they're already scouting anyway. But you raise your profile for everything else, for guys that are concerned about branding and the shoe deal and all these different things that come with NBA stardom. If you can achieve that level, there's still that difference of being around here and just being a known commodity.
He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Robin Lundberg. This is First and Last here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. I think you got it. I don't think it has any effect on your NBA draft status. The NBA teams are already over there. In fact, you see more and more guys getting drafted from over there, and whether they're from America and going over to play overseas, or they're foreign-born players. But as far as their notoriety in the States, of course, it's better in college basketball, because I would easily argue that the level of play is higher there. The top EuroLeague teams, I think, are easily better than the top NCAA teams. It's why I snickered and laughed. Even, this isn't second guessing, but when people were like, Kristaps Porzingis is such a project, it's going to be so much for him to adjust. And I was like, he's playing professional basketball since he was like 14 years old over there. Just because you didn't see it on your TV doesn't mean it doesn't count. But that's where you do lose out. You don't become the household name over here first. But does that actually matter if your end game is the NBA? Because those NBA scouts are over there. Those NBA GMs are looking over there. And they're no longer hesitating to draft guys from over there.
No. So if that continues to be more of a trend, then we'll see. We wait and see, because even to that end, even to the idea that, all right, you've got guys that could get potentially more and more visible over there, that becomes an option. That's still a relatively small group of guys that you're basically saying, all right, to affect the NCAA model, because that's not going to really change it. I don't think you're going to see one-and-done guys go over there for just that 1 year, knowing that NBA stardom awaits if they can just wait it out in college for 1 year. The guys that are almost assured of lottery status, I don't know if it changes much for them. So are you talking about maybe depleting the back end of your roster, a lot of the senior-laden teams that we saw in this NCAA tournament? Could it be enticing to some of those guys and then losing some of that depth in college basketball? Because I still think the lion's share of guys that we see in college operate in that middle ground where they're not really sure where their lot in this whole landscape is, basketball guys. And so would they still be enough to buoy what is a tremendously successful money-making model for everyone else?
First and Last.
The Knicks played last night. They messed up again. This is so funny, right? Because we're sitting here and we talk about how tanking needs to be taken out of the game, and then at the same time, it's the Knicks messed up. They beat the Sixers last night. They won a game by a point last night.
We kept saying the same thing about. I heard Mike Wilbon, who went off about all of the current state of the NBA, and then in the same breath 2 days ago was talking about how all the Lakers' wins as of late were stupid wins that were preventing them from future success. So we can't seem to keep track of all the outrage in this. You try and get outraged by things that you believe as a sports person you need to be outraged by, these slights against the fan and against the integrity of the game, and yet the logical person in your brain is like, oh, well, this isn't good for them going forward. They're not helping their position any in the future, and then you have to snap back into being sportsman. Speaking of going forward, here was Carmelo Anthony.
It's nothing that I'm looking forward to hear. I think this is, at this point, it's all on me. I have a lot of thinking and reflecting, to do, and it's all on me at this point. I'm pretty sure the organization have an idea, a thought on what they want to do, how they want to do it. But at this point, it's all on me.
Do you want to be back?
Yeah, I would love to. Sorry. I would love to be back. I would love to be back, but there's some things that I would love to see different. Kind of just the mentality, just a winning mentality and wanting to win, and being committed to that.
He said that he might get traded in the offseason also, which he has control over, right? I mean, so when he's saying that means that's at least a hint that he'd be willing to waive his no-trade clause. The question with Carmelo remains, where would he get traded to? Because the no-trade makes it difficult because the Knicks can't pick. And then you wonder what kind of places he would accept. And the typical teams that you're looking at don't really make the most sense, I don't think. You'd have to look beyond that. I look at I'm trying to think of places where it could make sense, and I see some of the smaller markets actually, like, what about at Oklahoma City? At the power forward spot in Oklahoma City, or Utah, or Milwaukee playing that stretch four position. I could see Washington perhaps, and maybe that would fit a little bit better in what he's looking for. But that's the big question going into the offseason is what gives with the Knicks first? And then if it is Carmelo that gives, where does he go?
Hey, is that the tier we're relegating him to then that would make the most sense? Because all of those teams, yeah, you mentioned a lot of playoff teams in there, but they're the ones that seem to be just on the outside looking in, just a move away. Do we view Carmelo as A, that move, or B, just having to accept that he's not going to get to basically cherry pick a championship squad like he would probably like to in this scenario?
Well, I just don't think it fits. I mean, yes, it'd be nice, but if he goes to Cleveland, he and Kevin Love are redundant. If he goes to the Clippers, he's not what they need on the Clippers. They need somebody that can guard the wings. They need that Swiss Army knife player, and Carmelo Anthony cannot guard on the perimeter at all at this point in his career. He really is a power forward. Now, he could still, when he's playing that position, he could still do that well because he guards that position better. Carmelo's, thick in the backside. He can hold his ground against bigger guys, and he still has an advantage off the dribble and off the catch and shoot against the bigger guys trying to guard him on the perimeter. So he can still help there. That's what I'm looking at, a team that needs or could use somebody to fill that spot specifically.
Then you're right. That does seem to relegate him. So then that comes back to who gives first. Is that something that he would be okay with at this point? Because it is now the sliding scale for him of does just being out of New York mean that much to him? Where he's willing, and we've seen him in the past. That's sort of been the hallmark of Carmelo's career, right? Leaving for a place where a lot of the other surrounding factors are appealing to him other than the basketball sense. I mean, he took the money to stay in New York and keep doing that when he had a chance to potentially go to a contender the last time around through the free agency process. So clearly, it's not something that he's all that averse to. It's just a matter of if that priority has changed this late in his career, although you could say that it hasn't, considering he was professing during the season that he wanted to keep staying in New York, that all the other parts of being a player for the Knicks were appealing to him and his family and his situation in that city.
Well, and he has to decide what is important to him. And it's not just about championships. It can also be about how you're viewed and perceived. Carmelo was viewed and perceived as a winner early in his career. People forget that. I think people were desirous of him to be the better of the LeBron, Melo, and all that comparison because he went to school and because they saw him win the championship at Syracuse. And the Nuggets had success early in his career, so he was considered a winner. Then he went to New York, where careers have gone to die, and now he's considered to many a loser. Whether that's fair or not, he's done a lot of losing with the Knicks. Now, they did losing before him, but they haven't done too much winning with him aside from one season, really. And if he wants to reshape that narrative, I mean, if he's content being in New York, being, super famous in New York, making the money, hanging out where he gets to hang out and calling it a career, that's fine. It's his own individual priority, because I doubt he wins a championship, right? You go and you try to win a championship, but we were talking about Paul Pierce before the show, because Paul Pierce last night got cheered into the game. He begrudgingly checked into a game last night he didn't want to go into. It's a little different for Paul Pierce because he did win the championship when Garnett and Ray Allen went to Boston. But Paul Pierce was viewed as a losing kind of player when maybe that wasn't fair. He was on a bad Celtics team, but he was scoring a lot of points. He scored 25 points per game or more 5 years during that stretch. And I think his later career actually helped him even after the championship. When he went to Brooklyn, he was the best player on that team for a year. When he went to Washington, he got big buckets for them in the postseason. If Carmelo could go somewhere where he's even playing in the postseason and has a chance to make some big shots, to extend some series, to be in a competitive series against an eventual champion, things like that could go a little bit of a way to at least cosmetically repairing his image away from loser to back somewhere onto the winner scale.
Well, yeah, because I think style-wise, his game is already something that we tend to want and root for. He's an accomplished and a polished offensive scorer. He's got that sort of attacking mentality that we seem to covet in our stars, and so all you need to do is couple that with at least an indication that you want to go somewhere, because I think that's been a big part of it, is Carmelo's decisions have indicated that ultimate prize just really hasn't been as important to him as some of these other things. And I'll never begrudge a guy for that. Get paid. Enjoy yourself. Enjoy everything that comes with being a professional and something that's tremendously hard to do year in and year out as your job. But his decisions also on that other end, when you talk about the way that we judge so many guys on that basis of, yes, championships, but just the pursuit of that competitive desire that this generation of players so often gets slighted for, maybe just showing an inkling towards that would go a long way. You're right.
First and last, the podcast.
I've watched a lot of Myles Garrett film. The ceiling is super high. The floor also is low. I've covered Myles Garrett in the SEC. Phenomenal athlete. He'll look good. He's going to win the underwear Olympics. The problem with Myles Garrett is, Greeny, I've seen him turn it down a little bit now. I've seen Myles Garrett run away sometimes.
Really?
Yeah, I've seen him turn it down a little bit, okay? Texas A&M did a good job of moving him around and making sure he didn't have to take on the double team. He's not the most physical guy. That would make me really, really leery of him as the number one overall pick in a sport where you got to be physical.
I just don't appreciate the kind of negativity and bias that he shows towards some guys, and I don't feel like I should have to sit there and take that.
On this week, it's Mike and Mike. Booger McFarland co-hosted with Greeny a couple days. Myles Garrett was supposed to come on the show, did not, and controversy ensued. And now joining us on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line is Booger McFarland. We're brought to you by Pennzoil Synthetics, taking synthetic motor oil performance to a whole new level. Make the switch to Pennzoil Synthetics today. And Booger, I guess with Myles Garrett, it's safe to say you do not think the ceiling is the roof.
Well, the ceiling is definitely the roof for you guys. The fact that you do a show from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. How about that?
Can definitely agree with that. We appreciate you getting up this early, by the way, Boog. I'm not sure if this is in the plans normally for you, but you are indeed the ceiling and the roof for getting up and being one of the very few guests on this show.
Well, no doubt. It's all good, man. And as far as the Myles Garrett thing is concerned, phenomenal athlete, probably going to be the number one overall pick. Sky's the limit. And, the comments that I've made or the criticism that I've said of him, it's kind of been not just recently, it's kind of been over the last couple of years. I've covered the kid. I've covered A&M. I've covered, all the teams in the SEC very closely. And, the A&M team hasn't been a physical team. And it's not just him. It's the entire team. And, he kind of played right into what they were, which was a really fast, really athletic team. But if you look at the numbers, I mean, they were the worst run defense just about in the SEC. That they were a team that wasn't a very physical football team. And then particularly when it comes to Myles Garrett, when you see a guy with measurables the way that he has, when you see someone with, freaky combine numbers, you say, okay, let me go back and take a look at the tape and see if I see the freakish athleticism show up. And sometimes it does. But when you look at the fact that he had 32 and a half career sacks, 16 of those came against schools that probably, Lundberg went to, or Lundberg hung out at Golic Jr., so there really wasn't any name recognition or any production against the bigger schools. And so I'm a little leery of why that is. And I stated that opinion. I've stated it for the last 2 years, but evidently he and his people really didn't like it,
Apparently you think I went to Appalachian State or something like that, Booker. Now, when you talk about the critique of Myles Garrett, I think you're totally fair. I think everything you're saying is absolutely within the confines of the football field and his performance out on the field. Did you make anything of the fact that he didn't want to come on the show with you guys? Does that weigh in at all in your overall evaluation?
A little, but at the end of the day, it's not going to mean anything whatsoever. If the only thing that Myles Garrett does is that's negative in the next 24 months is not come on and talk to an old defensive lineman on Mike and Mike, then he's going to be perfectly fine. It's a lapse in judgment. It's probably a regrettable moment, and so I really didn't put a whole lot into it. It's about living and learning when you're 21. And Golic, you've been a little closer to this than I have been recently. When you're young, you make some rash decisions. And I think the fact that, he made that in the spur of the moment based on some comments that I've made over the last couple of years, and I think he'll learn from it. And for me, if he does learn from it, then, you know what, the more the merrier. Really no harm, no foul.
Yeah, you'd hope it can be a teachable moment as he goes forward to now become a professional in the way that you were for so many years. And so we'll look at him, you said, probably going to be the number one overall pick. As far as that conversation goes, we saw in conjunction with him not coming on with you guys, there was the tweet from Adam Schefter the other day that Cleveland has not decided yet on him as the number one pick specifically. Do you think there's any real merit to the conversation that Mitchell Trubisky could actually be getting some consideration for that top pick?
Yeah, I do. And, for a couple of reasons. Number one, anytime Schefter's on the treadmill and he's getting fired up at your dad because your dad is kind of poo-pooing on his information, that really, okay, Schefter, he's got a little something there. And then more importantly, think about this. Cleveland could take Myles Garrett. They could take the next 5 players in a row that weren't quarterbacks. What good is that going to do them? Cleveland has amassed so many picks over the last 10 or 12 years. Most of their picks in the first round, except Manziel and another guy or whatever, have been defensive guys. And so what has that gotten them? Absolutely nothing. They've been terrible. So if you're Cleveland, Myles Garrett is a great cornerstone, but it's not going to make you a team that can win. Until they get a quarterback, they're going to continue to be terrible. And so I understand what they're saying. If in their draft room, if they've come to the conclusion that Mitchell Trubisky is the best quarterback in this draft, number one, and number two, if Hugh Jackson says, you know what, he can be my quarterback for the next 10 years. If and only if they've come to that conclusion, at that point, it doesn't matter where you take him. You can take him 1 overall, you can take him 10 or 50, it doesn't matter. You have to get him. And so taking him number 1 overall doesn't matter. We make so much stuff out of where a guy goes, number 1, number 3. The only time we talk about draft slots is the first year. After that, it's about production on the field. So I do buy into it, and I do put some merit in the fact that they're trying to figure it out and make a decision not because of Garrett, but because the quarterback, and it's the most important position in football.
First and last, Robert Lundberg, Mike Golic Jr. talking to Booger McFarland here on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. And Booger, I'm going to need you to prepare yourself for this one because I know on Mike and Mike earlier this week, you're talking about whether you could beat Jack Nicklaus and Lee Trevino and others. I think that Mike Golic Jr. believes his grandmother could beat you in golf.
Yeah, I've heard this, and Dad kind of said something about that. Here's what I'll say, and everybody's kind of giving me a lot of flack about this, but think about this, guys, and let's just think about the athletic competition. At some point, age is in my favor. Now, that may be 80 years old, that may be 85, it may be 90, but the laws of physics says that at some point, those guys are going to lose flexibility. They're going to lose the ability maybe even to walk a little bit. And so everything comes into my favor. I just happen to think that age is like 80, okay? And so right now, Nicholas at 77, Gary Player at 81, okay, Lee Trevino, he's the only one that's been man enough to step out and challenge me. I just think that, I can handle those guys. And we're not going to play 6,000 yards, by the way, Golic Jr. We're going to be at the back of the tips, and we're going to walk. We're going to carry our own bags. So that there are going to be some rules to this that are going to tilt this match in my favor, where the youth and athleticism can really benefit me.
So my big question is, Booger, A, have you actually set this up with Lee Trevino? And B, are you also going to tip it in your favor and get it on your home course? Are you going to get it onto a place that you belong, or are you going to let Lee at least have that as something he can call the shots on?
Well, the place we're going to play is a place called Dallas National. It's in the center of Dallas. I've played there before. Lee's a member, so technically it's his home course, but I've played there a few times before. And the match is in the process of being set up and should be done in the next 60 days.
You know what? I have a reality show idea. You guys should do this like every week or every month until you figure out the exact age that you're talking about, the exact age where Booger McFarland becomes better than Lee Trevino at golf.
Well, I think we're pretty close to it. I mean, to me, anytime you start venturing toward the age of 80, because you don't want to do it at 90. Like 90 now, everybody says, well, Booger's taking advantage of the old dudes. Well, I think right around 77, 80, these old dudes still think they got it. And, every now and then, and Golic Jr., you can attest to this, at some point, you thought that you could just beat your dad, whatever it was, in wrestling or whatever. He thought he still had it. At a certain age in your mind, you said, you know what, I can do this. Now, whatever age that was, that's how I feel right now with Trevino.
Well, Booger, I'm proud of you for reaching the prime of your golf life here. We need to make sure that we can hook this up, get some sort of video documentation of this event, and really make sure that we put this out for the masses. I think it's going to be a big deal. But you, again, the big deal for joining us this early in the morning. We really appreciate the time, Booger. Go out, hit the links, and start getting ready for that. It's going to be a big match.
Anytime, man. Many props to you guys for doing radio from 4 to 6 when most people are still asleep.
Thank you for listening to the First and Last podcast. You can listen and subscribe to all ESPN podcasts in the Listen tab of the ESPN app. First and Last.